There are moments in your life that act as doorways. Most of the time, you do not even realize you are standing on the threshold until you have already stepped through, and the latch has clicked softly shut behind you. You look back and see the room you just left, the one you had always known, the one whose dimensions and shadows were as familiar as your own breath, and you realize it is now sealed. It has become the past. The air in the new room is different, thinner perhaps, or charged with a strange, humming electricity. You are the same person, but the space you occupy has fundamentally changed, and so you must change with it. For me, that doorway was not a grand, ornate archway, but the quiet, unassuming space of the few inches between my body and Alex's on a cheap motel mattress, under the buzzing fluorescent glow of a bathroom light leaking under the door. It was after the regional championships, our junior year. The air in the room was thick with the scent of chlorine, a smell so deeply embedded in our lives it was practically a part of our DNA, and the faint, sweet staleness of cheap air conditioning. We were exhausted, our muscles humming with that deep, satisfying ache that comes after pushing your body to its absolute limit. We had taken second place, a respectable finish, but not the victory we had been silently promising each other for months. There was a quiet film of disappointment coating everything, making the celebratory pizza taste like cardboard and the coach's praise feel hollow. We shared the room, as we always did on away meets. It was an unspoken rule, a gravitational pull. Leo and Alex. It was just how things were. The room had 2 double beds, but one was already buried under a mountain of wet towels, swim bags, and discarded warm-up gear. So, we ended up in the other one, lying on our backs with a foot of careful distance between us, staring at the stippled texture of the ceiling. For hours, we did not speak. The silence was not uncomfortable. Our friendship had been built on a foundation of comfortable silences, of long car rides with only the radio for company, of entire practices where the only communication was a shared glance across the water. But this silence was different. It felt heavier, weighted with the unspoken what-ifs and almosts of the day. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a constant, magnetic presence in the cool air of the room. I cataloged the sounds, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway, the shuddering gasp of the ice machine down the hall, and the impossibly loud sound of his breathing. Inhale, exhale, a steady rhythm that I had long ago memorized, a rhythm I could pick out from across a crowded pool deck. My heart was a frantic, panicked bird beating against my ribs, convinced that he could surely hear it, that its desperate tempo would give everything away. Then, in the deep blue twilight of the room, he shifted. The mattress dipped, and the space between us shrank from a foot to inches. I held my breath, my entire body rigid, a statue carved from fear and hope. He rolled onto his side, facing me. I did not dare turn to look, but I could feel his gaze on the side of my face. The air grew thick, charged, and I felt that strange, humming electricity I would later recognize as the atmosphere of a room about to change forever. His arm, heavy with exhaustion, lifted from the mattress. I felt the whisper of its movement, the barest disturbance of the air, and then the gentle, world-altering weight of his hand settling on my shoulder. It was not a pat, not a casual gesture of camaraderie. His fingers curled slightly, a soft pressure that seemed to anchor him, to ask for something without words. My mind went completely, terrifyingly blank. Every line I had ever drawn, every rule I had meticulously constructed to keep my world from imploding, dissolved into dust. In that moment, there was no swim team, no friendship to protect, no future to fear. There was only the solid, warm weight of his hand on my shoulder, a silent question hanging in the space between our heartbeats. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that I had just stepped through a doorway, and the lock had clicked shut behind me. To understand the weight of that hand, you would have to understand the foundation upon which it was placed. You would have to go back 4 years, to the first day of freshman swim tryouts. I was a quiet, lanky kid, all knees and elbows, with a pair of secondhand goggles and a heart full of anxious ambition. I was a photographer, an observer by nature. I lived my life through a lens, framing the world into manageable compositions, finding beauty in the quiet details others overlooked. I was more comfortable in the hushed, red-lit sanctuary of my darkroom than anywhere else. The pool was the one exception. In the water, my awkwardness dissolved. The roar of the world was muted, replaced by the rhythmic splash and pull, the steady drum of my own pulse in my ears. It was a place of singular focus, a moving meditation. And then there was Alex. He arrived on the pool deck like a minor weather event. All bright, easy confidence, a flash of white teeth, and a laugh that echoed off the tiled walls. He was effortlessly athletic, his movements already possessing a fluid grace that the rest of us were still struggling to learn. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets caught in his orbit. I watched him from a distance, the way I watched everything, cataloging the way he shook the water from his hair, the easy camaraderie he had with the upperclassmen, the competitive fire that lit up his eyes when the coach blew the whistle. I expected to dislike him, to resent that casual brilliance. It would have been easier. But then, during a particularly grueling set of sprints, my left calf seized up. A sudden, blinding knot of pain shot through the muscle, and I was left clinging to the lane line, gasping. I was mortified, convinced this was the end of my chances to make the varsity team. As other swimmers finished their laps and grumbled their way out of the pool, a head popped up in the water beside me. It was Alex. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and he was breathing hard, but his eyes were clear and focused on me. "You okay, man?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. I tried to nod, but the pain made me wince. Without another word, he ducked under the lane line and came to my side. "Here," he said, guiding me toward the wall. "Press your foot flat against the tile." Push. He stayed there with me, his hand a steady presence on my back, talking me through the stretches until the muscle finally, blessedly, released. He did not make a big deal of it. He did not draw attention to my moment of weakness. He just helped. Afterward, as we sat on the bleachers, he nudged my shoulder. "Leo, right?" I nodded, still embarrassed. "I'm Alex," he said with that easy smile. "You've got a killer backstroke. We could be good training partners." And just like that, the foundation was laid. We became inseparable. Our lives began to sync to the rhythm of early morning alarms and the scent of chlorine. We were perfectly matched in our dedication, if not in our temperament. He was the raw power, the explosive start. I was the endurance, the steady pace. He pushed me to be faster, more aggressive. I tempered him, taught him how to conserve his energy, how to strategize for a longer race. We learned each other's rhythms, the subtle shifts in posture that signaled fatigue, the flicker in the eyes that meant determination. Our friendship was forged in the crucible of shared exhaustion and the quiet understanding of a common goal. It was a language spoken in split times and tired sighs, in the shared silence of a car ride home at dawn, the windows fogged with our breath. For 2 years, it was simple. He was my best friend, the brother I never had. I documented our lives through my camera, filling rolls of film with the minutiae of our world. Candid shots of him laughing on the bus, the intense focus on his face before a race, the way the late afternoon sun caught the water droplets on his shoulders. My darkroom became a shrine to our friendship, the walls papered with these frozen moments of time. I told myself I was simply practicing my art, capturing the world around me. But then, somewhere in the chemical bath of the developer, another truth began to emerge. I would watch his image slowly appear on the paper, a ghost becoming solid, and I would feel a painful, undeniable ache in my chest. It was the winter of our sophomore year, during a particularly boring history lecture, that the name for that ache finally crashed into my consciousness. He was sitting next to me, head propped on his hand, idly doodling in the margins of his notebook. A stray beam of sunlight from the window caught the gold flecks in his brown eyes, and in that quiet, ordinary moment, the thought arrived, fully formed and terrifying. I was in love with him. The realization did not feel like a revelation. It felt like a diagnosis. A terminal condition for which there was no cure, one that I would have to manage in secret for the rest of my life. It changed everything and nothing. On the surface, our friendship remained the same. We still trained together, ate together, complained about homework together. But inside, I was living a double life. Every casual touch became a spark, every shared glance a conversation I had to decipher. I became a scholar of his moods, an expert in the subtle language of his body. I learned that the slight furrow in his brow meant he was worried about his parents, that the way he tapped his fingers on the steering wheel meant he was excited about an upcoming meet. I built a fortress around my heart, reinforcing it daily with the bricks of our friendship, terrified that one wrong move, one unguarded expression, would bring the whole thing crumbling down, burying us both in the rubble. He, of course, was oblivious. His life was a revolving door of pretty girls who were drawn to his sunshine. There was Sarah, then Jessica, then Emily. I was the constant, the one he came to when things went wrong. I listened to him complain about their arguments, gave him advice I felt wholly unqualified to give, and felt a bitter, shameful twist of jealousy every time he talked about them. I played my part, the supportive best friend, while a part of me cataloged every flaw he mentioned, every incompatibility, hoarding them like a dragon hoarding treasure. He would talk about how they did not understand the pressure, how they got annoyed when he had to miss a date for a morning practice. And I would just nod, thinking, I understand. I'm right here. But I never said it. The risk was too great. Our friendship, this precious, essential thing, was the most important structure in my life. I would rather live in its shadow forever than risk burning it to the ground for a love that could never be returned. So I stayed quiet, and I watched, and I waited for a day I was sure would never come. The shift began subtly, as most significant changes do. It was the autumn of our senior year, a season heavy with the weight of lasts. The last first day of school, the last season opener, the last homecoming. The future, which had always been a distant, abstract concept, was suddenly a looming presence, casting a long shadow over everything. College applications were a constant source of stress, a series of existential questions condensed into 500-word essays. The pressure on the swim team was immense. We were co-captains, and the expectation was a state championship. It was a pressure cooker, and the first cracks began to show in Alex. His relationship with his then-girlfriend, a cheerleader named Chloe, had been fraying for months. It finally snapped one Tuesday afternoon. I found him sitting alone in his truck in the school parking lot long after practice had ended, just staring at the steering wheel. The engine was off, and the setting sun cast long, orange stripes across his face. I tapped on the window, and he flinched, startled out of whatever reverie he'd been lost in. He unlocked the door, and I climbed in. The silence was thick and brittle. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. She broke up with me, he said it flatly, a simple statement of fact, but I could see the tremor in his hands. She said I'm distant, he continued, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. Like I'm never really there. Like there's a wall she can't get past. I did not know what to say. I just sat there, a silent witness to his quiet devastation. He was not crying, but in some ways, this was worse. It was a hollowing out, a deflation of that bright, confident energy that was so fundamentally Alex. He seemed smaller, lost in the cavernous space of his own truck. I wanted to tell him that I saw past the wall. I wanted to tell him that I saw the thoughtful, sometimes insecure person he kept so carefully hidden behind the easy smile. But all I could manage was, I'm sorry, man. He just shook his head, running a hand through his damp hair. It's not just her, he mumbled, more to himself than to me. It's everything. School. Swimming. My dad wanting me to go pre-med. I feel like I'm drowning, the irony of the word, coming from him. The boy who was more at home in the water than on land, was not lost on me. It was a confession of a profound exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. That conversation was the catalyst. It was as if admitting his vulnerability out loud gave him permission to lean on me in a new way. The unspoken boundaries of our friendship, the ones I had so carefully policed, began to blur. It started with small things. He would seek me out between classes, not to talk about swimming, but just to stand in comfortable silence for a few minutes before the bell rang, a brief respite from the noise of the hallways. Our post-practice talks grew longer, stretching late into the evenings, filled less with strategy and more with his anxieties about the future. He began to close the physical distance between us, too. On the bus to away meets, he would fall asleep with his head on my shoulder, something he had never done before. The first time it happened, I sat ramrod straight for the entire 2-hour journey, my muscles screaming in protest, terrified that the slightest movement would wake him, would break the fragile, unspoken trust of the gesture. This was the new landscape we were navigating, a territory without a map. He was seeking a kind of comfort from me that he had never sought before, a quiet, steadying presence. And I, in my secret, selfish heart, was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. I was becoming his harbor, his safe place to anchor when the storms of his life grew too rough. I told myself I was just being a good friend, that this was what captains did for each other. But I knew, in the quiet solitude of my darkroom, as I watched his tired face emerge in the developing tray, that this was something more. It was a shift in the tectonic plates of our relationship, a deep and seismic change that was creating a new kind of intimacy between us, one that was both profoundly comforting and dangerously close to the one thing I wanted most in the world. The ritual began without ceremony. It was born of exhaustion and convenience, or at least, that was its disguise. A few weeks after his breakup with Chloe, we had a brutal evening practice, one of those sessions that leaves you feeling like every cell in your body has been wrung out like a wet towel. We were the last two to leave the locker room, moving with the slow, deliberate shuffle of the profoundly tired. We walked to our cars, parked next to each other under the buzzing orange glow of the parking lot lights. "I don't think I can make the drive home," he said, his voice a low murmur. His family lived a good 40 minutes away, on the other side of the county. "I'm going to fall asleep at the wheel." He leaned against the hood of his truck, his head tipped back to look at the starless, overcast sky. "You can crash at my place," I offered. The words left my mouth before I had even fully formed the thought. My house was only 10 minutes from the school. "My parents are out of town this week. It's quiet." He looked at me, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Yeah?" he asked, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "You sure it's okay?" I nodded, my heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat. "Of course. It's no big deal." It was a lie. It was the biggest deal in the world. That first night set the template. We drove to my house, the silence in the car thick but not uncomfortable. We did not bother with the lights, navigating the familiar layout of my house by the glow of a single street lamp outside the living room window. He collapsed onto the couch, and I grabbed a blanket and a pillow from the hall closet and tossed them to him. "Thanks, Leo," he mumbled, already half asleep. I went upstairs to my room, my mind racing. I lay in my own bed, listening to the sounds of the house, acutely aware of his presence downstairs. I could hear the soft sigh of the couch cushions as he shifted, the gentle rhythm of his breathing. It felt strange, monumental, to have him sleeping under my roof, to be the sole guardian of his rest. A week later, it happened again. Another grueling practice, another mumbled confession of exhaustion. This time, he did not even bother with the couch. He followed me up the stairs, a silent shadow at my back. "The couch kills my back," was all he said, by way of explanation. My room was small, dominated by my queen-sized bed. There was nowhere else, really. I did not offer him pillows or blankets. I did not say anything at all. I just climbed into my side of the bed, the left side, by the window, and left the other half for him. He moved with a kind of sleepy certainty, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and slid under the covers beside me. The mattress dipped under his weight, creating a gentle valley between us. And so the ritual was established. It became our new normal. 2, sometimes 3 nights a week, his truck would be parked behind my car in the driveway. We would fall into a quiet routine. We would enter the house, drop our bags by the door, and ascend the stairs in a shared, weary silence. There was no discussion, no negotiation. It was an unspoken agreement, a habit formed in the space between exhaustion and an unnamed need. He would take the right side of the bed, I would take the left. We would lie on our backs, a careful 6 inches of space between us, and stare at the ceiling, the day's chlorine slowly evaporating from our skin. For me, Those nights were a form of exquisite torture. My entire being would become a finely tuned sensory instrument, hyper-aware of his proximity. I could feel the warmth of his body across the small gulf of cotton sheets. I could hear the subtle change in his breathing as he drifted from wakefulness into the shallow depths of sleep. My own body would remain perfectly still, my muscles locked in a state of suspended animation. I was terrified of moving, of shifting my weight, of letting my foot accidentally brush against his. I was a trespasser in my own bed, a guest in my own life, afraid that any sudden movement would shatter the fragile, beautiful, terrifying illusion of the moment. As the weeks went on, the space between us began to shrink. It happened in increments, a slow, unconscious erosion of the boundary we had initially, silently, established. One night, I woke in the pre-dawn grayness to find his arm thrown across my chest, his hand resting just above my heart. His breathing was a warm, steady puff of air against my neck. Panic, hot and swift, shot through me, followed by a wave of such profound, aching tenderness that it almost brought me to tears. I lay there for over an hour, not daring to move, my own heart beating a frantic, muffled rhythm against his palm. I studied the faint outline of his profile in the dim light, the sweep of his eyelashes against his cheek, the slight parting of his lips. It was a moment of impossible intimacy, a secret gift I had been given, and I hoarded it, memorizing every detail, convinced it would never happen again. But it did. The accidental, sleepy touches became more frequent. A leg tangled with mine, his head finding its way to my shoulder. He was a restless sleeper, and in his unconscious state, he seemed to be seeking an anchor, a solid point in the darkness. I became that anchor. He would gravitate toward my warmth, my stillness, until we were curled together, a tangle of limbs under the blankets. He never mentioned it in the morning. When the alarm went off, he would already be on his side of the bed, as if a magnetic force had repelled him back to his starting position while he slept. He would stretch, grunt, and complain about morning practice as if nothing had happened. His plausible deniability was perfect. He was just tired. The bed was just a bed. It was just easier than driving home. It was all perfectly logical, perfectly platonic. And this ambiguity was the thing that was slowly, methodically, breaking me apart. I was living in a beautiful, fragile bubble of what if, and I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that sooner or later, it was going to pop. The state championship meet was the culmination of our entire high school careers, the final act of a 4-year play. The air in the natatorium was electric, a humid, chaotic symphony of roaring crowds, echoing start buzzers, and the constant, churning splash of water. It was the loudest place on earth, but for me, the world had narrowed to the 4-foot width of lane 4 and the figure of Alex on the starting block next to me. We were the anchors for the final relay, the 400-yard freestyle, the race that would decide everything. The entire meet came down to this single, explosive moment. When I dove in for the final leg, we were half a body length behind our rivals. The water was a cold shock, a violent baptism that washed away everything but the primal need to win. The next 54 seconds were a blur of burning lungs, screaming muscles, and the singular focus on the black line at the bottom of the pool. I touched the wall, and the world came rushing back in a tidal wave of sound. I ripped my goggles off, my eyes stinging, and looked at the scoreboard. We had won, by 0.07 of a second. The celebration was a chaotic, joyous explosion. Teammates were screaming, hugging, pulling us out of the water. Coach was crying. Our parents were a blur of ecstatic faces in the stands. In the middle of it all, Alex found me. He grabbed me, lifting me off my feet in a hug that knocked the wind out of me. He was yelling something in my ear, but I could not hear it over the roar of the crowd and the pounding in my own head. All I could feel was the frantic, triumphant beat of his heart against mine. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated victory, a perfect, cinematic ending. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, a profound melancholy started to seep in. This was it. The end. We had done what we set out to do, and now it was over. The structure that had defined our lives and our friendship was dissolving. Later that night, the team went out for a celebratory dinner, but the energy was already different. The talk was of college, of goodbyes, of futures that were rapidly diverging. Alex was unusually quiet, his earlier elation replaced by a thoughtful, almost somber stillness. He picked at his food, his gaze distant. He seemed to be wrestling with something, a storm gathering behind his eyes. When we finally left, he did not get into his own truck. He just walked to the passenger side of my car and got in, a silent, declarative act. He did not need to ask to come over. The ritual was too ingrained. We drove back to my house, the massive state championship trophy sitting awkwardly in the back seat. The silence in the car was different from all the other silences we had shared. It was not comfortable or weary. It was taut, stretched thin with unspoken emotion. When we got to my room, the familiar routine felt alien. The pretense of exhaustion, the justification for this intimacy, was gone. We had won. We were not tired. We were wired, thrumming with adrenaline and emotion. We sat on the edge of my bed, on our respective sides, the trophy gleaming on my nightstand between us like a third person in the room. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could feel the thrum of 1,000 unsaid things in the air. I wanted to thank him, to tell him what these 4 years had meant to me, to confess everything. But the words were a tangled knot in my throat. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Leo." I turned to look at him. He was not looking at me, but at his own hands, which were clenched in his lap. "Can I ask you something weird?" My heart, which had been beating a slow, nervous rhythm, suddenly kicked into a gallop. I could only manage a nod. He took a deep breath, and when he finally lifted his eyes to meet mine, they were filled with a raw, terrifying vulnerability I had never seen before. "Would it be okay," he started, his voice barely a whisper, "if I kissed you?" The question did not shatter the silence. It became the silence. It hung in the small space between us, a fragile, shimmering thing, impossibly heavy. My entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every single one of my carefully constructed walls, every fortress I had built around my heart, crumbled to dust in that single, whispered sentence. He was not asleep. He was not hiding behind a veil of plausible deniability. He was here, now awake and asking. The fear that had been my constant companion for years was suddenly gone, replaced by a strange, breathtaking calm. This was the moment the doorway appeared. This was the threshold. He had asked for permission to cross, but in doing so, he had already opened the door and was holding it for me. I did not answer him with words. I could not have spoken if I had tried. My throat was tight, my lungs empty. Instead, I closed the small distance between us. It felt like moving through water, a slow, deliberate motion that required every ounce of my focus. I watched his eyes track my movement, a flicker of fear and hope in their depths. And then, our lips met. It was not a kiss of passion or pent-up desire. It was a kiss of quiet confession. It was tentative, soft, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of chlorine and relief. It was the gentlest of collisions, a yielding, a final, silent admission of a truth that had been living between us, unspoken, for years. In the quiet of my room, with the ghost of our victory gleaming on the nightstand, we were not teammates, not friends, not victors. We were just two boys, finally speaking the same language. The beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together had finally found its voice. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through my window blinds. For a disorienting moment, I was suspended in a state of dreamlike peace, the memory of the kiss a warm, glowing ember in my chest. I felt the indentation in the mattress beside me before I saw it. The right side of the bed was empty. The sheets were cool to the touch. Alex was gone. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach, quickly extinguishing the warmth from the night before. I sat up, my heart starting a frantic, panicked rhythm. He could not have been gone long. A faint, familiar scent of his shampoo still lingered on the pillow. I listened for the sound of his truck starting, for footsteps downstairs, for anything. There was only the profound, suffocating silence of an empty house. He had left without a word. No note, No text, nothing. He had simply vanished, leaving behind a perfectly made bed and the ghost of a question. The beautiful clarity of the previous night shattered into a million sharp, painful pieces. What had I done? What had I misread? The kiss, which had felt so much like a mutual confession, now seemed like a reckless, impulsive act. A mistake. Perhaps it had just been the emotion of the win, a moment of temporary insanity brought on by adrenaline and the end of an era. My mind, always my own worst enemy, began to spin out a tapestry of worst-case scenarios. I had ruined everything. I had taken our friendship, the most important thing in my life, and broken it with a single, selfish act. The weight of his hand on my shoulder in that motel room felt like a memory from another lifetime, a prelude to a disaster I had been too hopeful to foresee. The doorway I thought we had walked through together, I had apparently walked through alone, and now I was locked in a new room, a cold, empty one, while he had fled back to the safety of the familiar. The next few days were a special kind of hell. At school, he actively avoided me. I would see him down the hall, and he would immediately turn and walk the other way, or become intensely interested in a conversation with someone else. He was a ghost in the spaces we used to share. In the locker room, he changed quickly and left before I was even out of the shower. The easy camaraderie of the team, which had always been a source of comfort, now felt like a spotlight on our sudden, inexplicable distance. The other guys noticed. There were questioning looks, a few tentative inquiries. "Everything cool with you and Alex?" one of them asked. I mumbled something about us both being stressed about college decisions, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. His silence was a physical presence, a heavy shroud that suffocated me. Every buzz of my phone sent a jolt of desperate hope through me, always followed by the crushing disappointment that it was not him. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, analyzing it from every angle, searching for the moment I got it wrong. Had I been too eager? Not eager enough? Had the look in his eyes been vulnerability? Or had it been a moment of profound confusion that I had selfishly interpreted as desire? I felt like a fool, like a naive kid who had mistaken a moment of emotional overflow for a declaration of love. The pain was a dull, constant ache behind my ribs, a hollow space where our friendship used to be. The ritual, the quiet intimacy of our shared nights, now felt like a cruel joke, a series of misunderstandings that had led me to this precipice of loss. After nearly a week of this agonizing Cold War, I reached my breaking point. The pain of his absence had curdled into a quiet, simmering anger, not just at him, but at myself, for allowing this silence to fester. Whatever the truth was, I deserved to hear it. Our friendship, our history, demanded at least that much. It was our last official day as a team. We were in the locker room, cleaning out our lockers, a final, melancholy ritual. Most of the guys had already finished and left, their voices fading down the hall. Soon, it was just the two of us, separated by a bank of metal lockers, the air thick with unspoken words. This was it. My last chance. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of stale sweat and chlorine, and walked around the lockers to where he stood. He was stuffing his gear into a duffel bag, his movements jerky and hurried. He did not look up, but I saw his shoulders tense as I approached. I stood there for a moment, waiting for him to acknowledge me. When he did not, I spoke, my voice softer than I intended, but steady. "Alex," he froze, his hand hovering over a pair of worn-out goggles. "You can't do this," I said quietly. "You can't just kiss me and then disappear. You can't pretend I don't exist." He still would not look at me. He zipped his bag with a sharp, violent tug. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his voice low and rough. The denial, so blatant and cowardly, snapped something inside me. "Don't," I said, my voice gaining a harder edge. "Don't lie to me. Not after everything." I took a step closer. "If it was a mistake, just say it. If you regret it, fine. I can take it. But you have to say something." This silence. It's worse than anything. He finally looked up, and the anguish in his eyes stole my breath. He looked cornered, terrified. He looked like the boy in the truck, the one who felt like he was drowning. "I can't," he whispered, shaking his head. "I can't talk about this. Why not?" I pushed, my own hurt making me relentless. Why? Because you're scared? Because you can't handle it. He flinched as if I had struck him. He slammed his locker shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty room. Yes, he finally exploded, his voice cracking. Yes, I'm scared. Is that what you want to hear? He turned to face me fully, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I don't know what's happening, Leo. I lie in bed at night, and I feel like my whole life has been a lie. Everything I thought I was, everything I thought I wanted. It doesn't make sense anymore. He started pacing, a caged animal in the narrow space between the benches. Chloe was right, he said, his voice laced with self-loathing. I was distant, because the only place I felt present, the only place I felt like myself, was with you. Studying, driving, just sitting in silence. It was the only time the noise in my head would stop. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression a raw mix of desperation and confusion. Those nights, sleeping at your place, it wasn't just because I was tired. I told myself it was, but it wasn't. It was because I couldn't sleep without it. I needed it. I needed to be near you. It was the only way I felt safe. The confession tumbled out of him, a torrent of dammed-up fear and uncertainty. And then after the meet, I looked at you, and I saw our whole future just ending, going off to different schools, moving on. And the thought of not having that, of not having you, it was terrifying. More terrifying than losing any race. He finally ran out of steam, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He leaned his forehead against the cold metal of the lockers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. So I kissed you, he whispered to the lockers. And it wasn't a mistake. It was the most honest thing I've done in my entire life. And that's what scares me. I kissed you, and I didn't regret it. I ran because I was terrified of how much I didn't regret it. I stood there, stunned into silence by the force of his admission. All my anger, all my hurt, evaporated, replaced by a wave of profound empathy. He had not been running from me. He had been running from himself. The wall he had built was not for Chloe or anyone else. It was for him, to protect him from a truth he was not ready to face. The whole time I thought he was rejecting me, he was actually wrestling with accepting himself. The silence that I had interpreted as a punishment was the sound of his entire world being rearranged. I closed the distance between us and gently, tentatively, placed my hand on his back. He flinched at the contact, but did not pull away. His body was trembling. Alex, I said softly, you're not alone in this. He finally turned from the lockers, his eyes glistening. And in the harsh, fluorescent light of the empty locker room, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared past, we began, slowly and uncertainly, to build a new foundation, one based not on unspoken rituals and plausible deniability, but on a fragile, terrifying, and beautiful truth. The aftermath of a storm is a quiet thing. The wind dies down, the rain ceases, and the world is left washed clean, still, and dripping. That is what the days following his confession felt like. The raging tempest of confusion and fear had passed, leaving behind a calm, tentative space for something new to grow. There were no grand declarations, no immediate labels. We did not suddenly become a couple in the traditional sense. Instead, we entered a period of quiet realignment, of learning a new way to be with each other now that the truth was out in the open. We started with talking, really talking, for the first time. We spent hours in my car, parked at the scenic overlook above town, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled. He talked about the pressure from his father, the suffocating expectation that he follow a predetermined path. He talked about his identity as the popular jock, a role he had played for so long he was not sure where it ended and he began. He admitted that his relationships had always felt like performances, like he was reading from a script he did not understand. And I talked too. I told him about the loneliness of living behind a camera lens, about the ache of loving him in secret for years, about the terror and hope that had warred within me during our nightly rituals. We laid our cards on the table, all the fears and insecurities we had kept hidden, and in doing so, we created a new kind of intimacy, one built on the solid ground of vulnerability. The physical dynamic between us shifted as well. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a gentle, deliberate intentionality. The first time he reached for my hand, we were walking out of a movie theater. It was not a sleepy, accidental touch. It was a clear, conscious choice. His fingers intertwined with mine, a simple, solid connection that sent a jolt of warmth straight to my heart. I looked at him, and he gave me a small, shy smile that was so different from his usual confident grin. It was a smile that was just for me. In that moment, holding his hand in the crowded lobby, I felt more seen than I ever had in my life. Summer arrived, blanketing the world in a thick, lazy heat. With the pressure of school and swimming gone, we had nothing but time. We filled it with simple things. We went on long drives with the windows down, singing off-key to the radio. We spent afternoons at the public pool, not training, but just floating, enjoying the water without the pressure of a stopwatch. We spent hours in my darkroom, the red light casting a warm, intimate glow on our faces as I taught him how to develop film. He was fascinated by the process, by the magic of watching an image emerge from nothing. He would stand close behind me, his chin resting on my shoulder, his arms wrapped loosely around my waist, as we watched our summer unfold on paper. One of my favorite photos from that time was one he took of me. I was looking at a freshly developed print, a candid shot of him, and the expression on my face was one of unguarded, unadulterated adoration. He had captured the way I looked at him, and in doing so, showed me that he was finally, truly, seeing me back. He started sleeping over again, but now, the ritual was transformed. There was no pretense. He came over because he wanted to be with me. We would lie in my bed and talk for hours, our voices low murmurs in the darkness. And when we fell asleep, we would find our way to each other without hesitation. Waking up with him was my new favorite part of the day. To see his face in the soft morning light, peaceful and unguarded, was a gift. One morning, I woke up to find him watching me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "What?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. "Nothing," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. This is nice. Waking up here." He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, sleepy kiss that tasted of morning and contentment. It was simple, easy, and utterly profound. The door to my room, which had once been a symbol of an open, ambiguous invitation, was now firmly closed at night. It was our space, a sanctuary we had built together, safe from the expectations of the outside world. We did not hide, but we did not broadcast our new reality either. We were simply us. Our friends, the swim team guys, eventually figured it out. There was no big announcement, just a slow dawning of realization. They saw the way we looked at each other, the easy way we shared space, the hand-holding that had become second nature. To their credit, no one made a big deal of it. There was a bit of gentle ribbing, the way there always was, but it was underpinned by an acceptance that was both surprising and deeply comforting. It turned out that the world we had been so afraid of was far more forgiving than we had imagined. Our friendship had been so solid for so long that the evolution into something more seemed, in retrospect, almost inevitable to them. As the summer began to wane, the conversation turned back to college. We had both been accepted to universities that were, by sheer coincidence, only an hour apart. What had once seemed like a daunting distance now felt like a manageable gift. We were not ending. We were just entering a new chapter. The future was no longer a terrifying void of separation, but a landscape of possibility. We would have our own lives, our own new friends and experiences, but we would have each other, a constant anchor in the new and unfamiliar waters we were about to enter. One of our last nights of the summer, we were lying on a blanket in my backyard, staring up at the star-dusted sky. A comfortable silence stretched between us, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of the city. "You know," Alex said, his voice a low rumble beside me. "For the longest time, I thought the most important moments of my life were the loud ones. The starting buzzer, the crowd cheering, the sound of my name over the loudspeaker." He turned his head to look at me, his eyes reflecting the starlight. But I was wrong. The most important moments were the quiet ones. The silence in the car after a hard practice. The sound of you breathing next to me in the dark. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb stroking the back of my palm. I was so scared of that silence, of what it meant. But it was never empty. It was just waiting. Waiting for me to be brave enough to listen. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. The doorway we had stepped through had not led to a place of loss or ruin, but to a room filled with a quiet, steady light. A room that felt, finally, like coming home.